Right. Hi, everyone. I'm delighted you could join us today. My name is Samantha Taylor, and I'm the Senior Research Analyst at IFI Global. I am responsible for the editorial development of our expansion into climate and sustainability matters at the firm. Today, we are going to share our observations on what we see happening in climate risk in the investment industry, which we believe is at a really interesting stage of development. It is clearly becoming more critical for both LPs and GPs. Simon Osborne, our CEO, and I are going to give a brief presentation for approximately 30 minutes, and then we'll have around 15 minutes for questions. If you do have a question, please do use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I should let you know that we aim to finish at around quarter to the hour, but I will now hand you over to Simon.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and I'm absolutely delighted that you are all able to join us today. We are very pleased to see that we have a good combination of people from across the investment community and from the climate risk data industry with us as well, and indeed also people from as always, it seems to be the case with our webcasts, a wide variety of different countries, ranging in this particular case from people as far east as India and as far west as the US. So welcome to you all. My name is Simon Osborne. As Samantha says, I'm the CEO of IFI Global, which is a research and media house based in the City of London. We have 3 monthly publications and 1 weekly, and one of those monthlies is Sustainable Investment Intelligence, which now includes the Climate Risk Tracker, which is effectively a publication within a publication. And the reason we wanted to host this webcast today is to share with you insights on what we have been discovering since we launched the Climate Risk Tracker, in particular in terms of how LPs and GPs are managing climate risk, which we're finding to be really, really interesting. But also another reason for wanting to host this thing today is to tell you about our developing GP and LP tracking tool. It is intended to provide the industry with data on how individual GPs and LPs manage climate risk, and it's going to be, or it currently is, broken down by private market category, and in the case of the LPs, the LP category that the LP is in, and also by region. We very much hope that eventually, it's going to take a bit of time to get it up to this position, but we're working on it. We very much hope it will allow the industry to monitor climate risk management standards across the piece, certainly by strategy, and perhaps even it can be used as a benchmarking tool. So today we've got an awful lot to cover. I'm going to probably talk more quickly than I normally do. We're going to try and cram in a lot of data and try and keep the presentation, as Samantha says, to a little bit less than half an hour to see whether there are questions. We hope there are a few, and as Samantha says, we'll be gone by quarter to the hour. So we're going to do a summary of what we see as the recent developments in climate risk that are particularly interesting, climate data selection issues for LPs and GPs, similarities and differences in approaches taken by LPs and GPs, climate risk analysis, whether particularly the LPs should be using third-party providers or doing it in-house or any combination of that. Got some things to say about that. The climate risk issues by private market strategy, and we're going to finish with a few words on the climate risk providers that we've been getting to know recently. So let me get on to that straight away. So I just mentioned in my introduction the Climate Risk Tracker. It's being a publication within a publication, effectively. It includes news and analysis, particularly aimed at GPs and LPs. We are going through every single month a different private market strategy from a climate risk point of view and analysing that. I'll say more about that in a minute. We, as I've just mentioned, are starting what we're calling this tracking service of GPs and LPs, comparing how they do climate risk management on an individual GP and individual LP basis and recording that. And we'll be continually updating that as well. It also includes the climate risk tracker, research and online forums, and listings for climate risk providers. So I mentioned now this what we're calling climate risk tracking. This is just apologies for there's a lot of stuff and difficult for you to see on the screen, but it'll be much clearer in SII in the section of the publication on climate risk that I referred to. But Samantha, perhaps you could quickly tell. This is the LP side of it. Do you want to say we picked just as an example for today some of the LPs, particularly the pension funds that were tracking, and of course there's many others on top of that. We picked them from different countries. Do you want to say something about the criteria we're looking at?
Yes, so as you can see, this is a really small sample of what we have and what we are looking at. So we've decided to really get in and monitor whether the LP uses external expertise, what asset classes they are rolling out climate risk assessment for. As you can see, there are variances. And I think I'll draw your attention to the far right column, which is the LP reliant on their asset managers for climate risk assessments, or are they sufficiently, able to monitor and assess it themselves? As you will see on the next slide, we will go to GP climate risk tracking.
I'll go there now. So this is, even more difficult for you to see, but trust us, it will be much clearer in the publication. Do you want to say the criteria we're using for this? Is the GP side of it?
Yes. So as you can see, this is another really down snapshot of what we have. I've selected 2 managers per the main private market strategy: infrastructure, real estate, private equity, and private credit. We really look at the governance. Do they have enhanced due diligence for climate risk? What asset classes, what part of the life cycle of the investment is climate risk analysis carried out? As you can see, there are quite significant variances, as well as their real focus in transition risk, I think, is also an important methodology to really look at and track. So that is our GP climate risk tracker.
I think the point to emphasize is, and apologies, it's difficult to show this in this presentation format. There's a lot of differences, both particularly on the LP side, but on the GP side. And there's differences by strategy. There's differences within strategies. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to keep on building that up, and that's what we're doing. So let me get back on track with the main part of the presentation. That was just to show you about the tracking service. Recent climate risk developments that we see that are of particular note. The first is, I think there's a growing realization, we pick this up a lot in our media, the economic damage of climate is greater than people imagined even until relatively recently. I mean, Moody's in the States came out the other day, was just in the US, that last year in 2025 alone, they say that there was $138 billion worth of damage from the impact of climate. So if that's correct, and if that's just the US, that means globally we're talking about probably over $1 trillion, especially when you consider that the US will have many more protected and better infrastructure to avoid damage. So it really is, if Moody's is correct, but there's other studies saying the same thing, a very serious issue, and there's a growing realization that it's a bigger one than people thought till recently. Underestimation of the risks, that's a separate issue. We'll be talking about that a bit more. Variance in climate risk data is huge. We'll be saying that a few times today as well. Climate risk is becoming an ever more important part of investor due diligence, and in different LP categories at different stages in the cycle. We're covering that quite a lot in the Climate Risk Tracker, and we do see the climate risk data is a growing industry. Samantha, are some points you'd like to add, examples to the general points here?
Yes, I would really like to stress that for the fourth point, FTSE Russell's asset owner survey found that sustainability risk is a major concern. 85% of respondents found that, climate risk is a major issue for their investment returns. And this was up from, I believe, 76% on the year previous. So a big change in 1 year. Variance in climate risk data that was flagged by the Climate Financial Risk Forum, who modeled various data from different providers and came to that conclusion.
Okay, let's keep going. As I say, we're going through this in a rate of knots deliberately. Climate data selection issues. This is a big debate I think LPs are having, which is how much they integrate, how much do they use or just take third-party data from the third-party data providers, or how much should they be using it as software tools? And I think also Samantha and GPs as well having the same discussion. How much are they taking just the reports from the data providers? How much should they be adapting it into their own software tools? Climate data variances, we'll be talking about that again and again. Data quality concerns and lack of private market climate risk data is another big issue. So any examples you'd like to share?
I'll just bring you back to the first point. Our assessment found that GPs in particular are really having trouble with third-party data. For example, Brookfield Asset Management, IFM Investors, and 3i Infrastructure, just to name a few, said that there are significant variances in climate data. They have challenges around its reliability, transparency, and a real lack of standardized methodology. On software tool side, CVC Capital Partners onboarded climate risk software to assist with their infrastructure strategy and found challenges again, lack of clear methodologies, but also importantly, the tool itself could not differentiate between leased and unlisted assets within the portfolio. It also failed to disclose supply chain risk for the company, so it needs some work. Climate data variances and data quality concerns, I'm going to loop them together. This is highlighted again by both LPs and GPs. It's most visible for GPs as a concern, to be fair, but pension funds such as USS, which is the largest UK pension fund, found that there are significant data gaps and quality issues. Within transition risk, some of their scenarios fail to account for material impacts to the financial sector, such as, capital availability and capital shocks.
Okay, thank you. Let's keep going. Okay, similarities and differences in approaches, business, both LPs and GPs. What's similar across the piece? LPs, as we've already said, clearly, and it comes out time and again, are very much interested in getting more comparable data than they've currently got. And LPs want data with actionable insights. That comes out again and again and again. By the way, emissions, unsurprisingly, probably are still very much the focus. They would have been at the beginning of this whole thing, still relatively recent. Emissions what it was all about. Now it's moved on in all sorts of different areas, but still emissions is very much a focus for understandable reasons. And some are now using external expertise in some form or another. I think we're talking about the LPs here, but of course the GPs are using external expertise pretty much all the time, I would have thought.
So. Where needed, I think is best to phrase it. Yeah. Some will. They kind of support their sustainability teams where a risk is really material enough and they don't have the internal expertise to deal with it effectively.
Okay. Anything else you want to say on similarities before we go to the differences, or?
Yes, LPs want actual insights. This is really stressed by Canadian and US pension funds. They don't just want data. They find it challenging to aggregate it, distill it into things that are useful. They just want things that they can actually do from it, really.
Because they haven't
Yeah,
got the staff on to do it to get on top of it
pretty
themselves.
much. It's additional time, it's additional cost.
Right. Okay, differences. So GPs use both top-down and bottom-up analysis, whereas LPs pretty much only use top-down. The illiquid alt GPs, particularly the infrastructure managers and the private equity managers, have to themselves engage with the portfolio companies for data and assessment. We'll say a bit more about that probably in a minute. And the LPs focus on due diligence and reporting obligations, whilst GPs are more interested in the material risks. Again, Samantha, do you want to give some examples of why we put that?
Yeah. I know that we're pressed for time, so the main takeaway I want to take from this slide is the bottom one. LPs are obviously focused on due diligence and reporting. Obviously, they are exceptionally visible to litigation risk. GPs, this is more interesting. They take, for example, Gore Street, right? They have a renewable energy strategy. They're focused on climate risk assessment for pre-acquisition to create a plan to bolster valuation to improve the asset's resilience against climate change and that kind of thing. But also GPs as a whole, they're really focused on stranded asset risk, market volatility, and more the transition risks.
Right. Thank you. Right. Now, we touched at the beginning on the debate, if that's the right way of putting it, between use of in-house expertise versus using or relying upon third-party providers. GPs generally, this is a broad generalization, integrate climate data into their traditional existing risk frameworks, which come from way outside the whole climate debate. That's the way it seems to be going with them. GPs see limitations on the climate risk tools on their underlying assets, particularly in the areas we talked about in the liquid alts. Many GPs, and this is, I think, a growing trend, are using data from multiple sources because they don't want to rely upon one, because they're not sure that one is going to always be right. And some LPs use in-house analysis, but do supplement it with third-party data for some assets. And LPs and GPs sometimes use external specialists to understand material risks. That's using specialists. There may be a university, I think you're talking about there, or something like that, rather than using a third-party data provider. So, Samantha, again, examples, if you wouldn't mind, of why we put these here.
Just taking the last one, for example, that you mentioned, pension funds such as OMERS, Nest, USS, all have used.
These are ones pension funds from different countries. I should listen to. OMERS is Canadian, is that right?
Yes, it is. It's a major Canadian pension fund. They all use universities in some way or form to understand modeling, understand what a third party has said. OMERS in particular, the University of Oxford has worked with their infrastructure team to onboard a third party provider for physical risk and transition risk. And then moving up to many GPs use data from multiple sources. Across the board, they do. A clear example I can give you is Gresham House, their real asset strategy. They take 4 different providers for each hazard and then take an average from that. So they do that to better hedge against discrepancies in the data, basically.
Thank you very much. Should we keep going? I think. Right. So a very important part of the thinking behind what we're doing in SII with this publication within a publication, the Climate Risk Tracker, is to analyze this by strategy because it does change very much by strategy. To understand what's going on, I think you really need to do deep dives into the individual strategies. We're starting off with the whole general markets mishmash at the top, and then so those are generally across the private markets as a piece, the general concerns. Data concerns, lack of standardization across asset classes, and I think lack of transparency is another one. We haven't really touched upon transparency or the lack of it yet today. In the infrastructure class, transition risk, which Samantha's already said, is really important. It cannot be underestimated. It's really, really important. I think particularly at Exit, Samantha will come back and say something about that. Private equity, that's what we're doing this month. We're doing private equity. We're having a deep dive into private equity. And it's quite complicated, but very interesting, a bit challenging in terms of what we're coming across in that particular asset class. Discrepancies in climate risk data means that private equity managers very often are now, if not very frequently, almost always going direct to their own portfolio companies to get the data themselves, which is an interesting way to go. Nature and biodiversity, which is a faster growing asset class than most people realize. We're doing a recorded podcast with Australian biodiversity and nature managers late tonight. So it's fascinating what the Aussies are doing in that area. It's growing very quickly, particularly down there. And they are, we may get into this tonight as well, LPs are looking for better data, tools and integration of nature and biodiversity risk with climate. Samantha, again, examples if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so taking the final point, nature and biodiversity, AP7, AP3, and Australian Superannuation Fund, Aware Super, all understand that there is a correlation between nature risk and climate, but they want clear methodology to be able to explore this risk and report on it. Obviously, you've got TNFD coming in, and just for the data itself, they understand that biodiversity data is exceptionally complex. So are hesitant on relying on one singular tool. They would much prefer to have various open source tools to use basically. So they really want a better understanding of it, an understanding of the correlation between the relationship between climate and nature. So that is something that they are actively working towards. Transition is a real focus for infrastructure strategies. As Simon mentioned, it is essential for exit considerations. Obviously, at exit, policy and regulation risks become crystallized. There's nothing you can do at that point. But also, transition risk also includes the asset's valuation. So whether certain CapEx requirements are going to be additional things have to be put in place to make the asset more suitable 10, 25 years down the line and more attractive to your end buyer. So that is something that I think isn't really considered too much in recent media, but is something we are really exploring for, especially for infrastructure, but also for real estate, renewable energy assets.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Right. We're actually doing okay on time. So we coming back to what's in the climate risk tracker, there is now a section where we list our subscribers and the people who are in the climate data provision business. We sent out, this is I think late last year before Christmas, we sent out to the industry, to a larger number of entities than the ones on the screen, to ask them for an understanding of what they do in the investment industry. Everything we largely do is in the investment industry. And we got replies from these firms that are on the screen here now. Now, a very important point, one of the reasons we did that is not just for the publication. We have a thing at IFI Global. It's actually started with our fund governance publication called the NED for independent fund directors, called Selection Intelligence Service, where we help managers find directors, independent directors for the boards of their funds. It then morphed into finding mancos and sometimes service providers, particularly in some specialist areas, for those who were looking particularly to come to Europe, particularly not only, but particularly US managers who were looking to develop in Europe. So SIS, or Selection Intelligence Service, developed into that. So it's now becoming a growing part of what we do as a business. And we have decided to extend SIS, or Selection Intelligence Service, into climate data providers. So we hope GPs and LPs, we know the GPs better than the LPs, will come to us for to help them understand what is out there in terms of climate risk data provision. And that is part of the reason we wanted to put that up on the screen today. So if there are, and I think that, indeed I know there are, or don't know whether they're actually here today right now, but they registered some other climate risk providers who didn't come back to us. Even if you don't want to subscribe, please do give us your information, because we would like to use it for Selection Intelligence Service purposes. Right, and we're coming to the end. We promised that we go do this rapidly and keep within half an hour. So we've been almost true to our word. So I just wanted to tell you, before we get into any questions, of what is coming up at Selection SII, and in our climate risk coverage in particular. The Climate Risk Tracker Strategy Series, once a month now, we are doing deep dives into the asset classes that are on the screen there. So in January, we did infrastructure. This month, as I mentioned, we're doing private equity. March, it's real estate in all its many different ways, commercial, residential, you name it. Natural capital, then renewable energy, and finally data centers. Once we've done the three illiquid alts, real estate, private equity, and infrastructure, we're going to have an illiquid alts webcast and probably some kind of probable white paper on that. And then we move on to the other strategies. And indeed, after the first 6 months of the year, we'll carry on doing that, either with some other strategies, and we'll go back to some of the old strategies as well. That's an important part of what we do. The Climate Risk also has a forum for subscribers, and the first one, which will probably be in the latter part of March, we'll be looking at what more could be done potentially for LPs to help them with their desire to have more standardization, and whether there are some benchmarking advances that could be made as well. So that's coming up later next month. And we are going to be going into the field. I said at the beginning, we're a research and media firm, and we will be doing research really to look at what LPs want from climate data, particularly that's to benefit, or we hope to benefit, the GPs who are trying to get them to invest in their strategies. And finally, this is not so much in our climate risk area, but we've also, this is separate from, this is more in another of our publications, but it will also be in SII. We're doing a major push on data centers in our publication AIS, and we're going to do what we think is the first data center risk research study in all its side, on the investment side, operational side, but also it will of course include climate risk, so that will be an aspect of it as well. So that is what we wanted to say. And I know, because we had two people who said they wished to be here today, but they couldn't be here today, so they wanted us to address questions they put. So let's see what questions we may have from potentially from anybody else. Please send questions in too. So let's have the first question, or the two questions that we have.
Well, just quickly, someone has asked if this is recorded. Yes, this is recorded both as a podcast, and it will be up on our YouTube channel. A more in-depth insight into what we have covered is in our sustainable investment publication, which should come out, I think, next week, isn't it?
Hopefully, yeah.
Yes. So everything's recorded, and you should be able to replay it as you wish. So the first question is, please explain how your selection intelligence works.
All right. Okay.
I think you've already touched on that.
Yeah. Only that I'll add to that. It's that what happens is that this is all entirely confidential, and anyone can come to us, and we'll supply them with a short list of people they should talk to. Normally, it's two or three at most, and then it's up to them what they do with it. They may do nothing with it. They may contact all of them or whatever. But we try and provide them with. We haven't done it yet in the climate area, but this is what we do in the Mancos and in the directors area in particular. We then suggest they contact them, and it's really between them. We don't get involved after that at all. That's probably all I wanted to say in addition to what I've already said about that.
Okay. So another question is, how has the Trump administration's reversal of the Biden administration's environmental policies affected climate risk management in the US?
Yeah, well, yes. You could probably answer that one probably more than me. That there's so many examples. It's because so much of the states is people don't know. I partly live in the states, and I live in Florida. We really have been impacted, and I live on the coast, and we have been impacted by climate change. Where the year before last, we had 3 hurricanes come through and caused an immense amount of damage in Sarasota, where I live. So it's a huge live issue, and it's extraordinary that you have a situation in the States where the president, luckily, lots of states are still, particularly California, but there's lots of other states too, have taken climate risk issues very seriously indeed. But we know what the federal government is doing. And as I said earlier in my presentation, there's a huge amount of damage that's been done every year in the States to the infrastructure of the country. The other thing, quickly, because you can answer this one too, Samantha. I would say that somewhat, not wishing to be too controversial too. I know there's a fair number of Americans following this webcast today, but I think I'm right in saying, tell me whether you think I'm wrong, Samantha. Both on the LP side and on the GP side, they're not as sophisticated as the LPs and GPs, either in Asia, certainly, definitely not in Australia, or in Europe, or indeed in Canada. Is that a fair comment as a generalization?
I think that is fair, especially from what we've picked up from our environmental investment monitor, especially for the LPs. They do allocate, but they're quite far behind.
They're relying upon their third-party managers. They don't do it much themselves, the LPs.
No. I mean, take, for example, New York teachers' retirement system. They're more or less completely hands off. They do monitor what their asset managers do by regularly asking them to participate in surveys, but they don't have an understanding of climate risk to the extent that the Europeans do as well.
Or the Canadians or the Australians.
Yeah.
It is interesting how far behind that is the case. And even BlackRock, arguably, well, not arguably, the biggest asset manager in the world, didn't Americans say they got fired by PGGM in the Netherlands because their climate risk data wasn't good enough? The Dutch take it very seriously.
Yes, you also have situations of, BlackRock and State Street dropping out of the net zero alliances, which the European pension funds don't like. So they chop and change their investment mandates. So you risk, whilst you're complying with domestic policy, you do lose out on business, I think, especially for the European funds.
Okay, thanks. And there's something else there as well, or?
I would also add that, as it's been highlighted by Norton Rose Fulbright's 2026 litigation survey, the US has become exceptionally more fragmented. It is very difficult for a firm or even an asset manager to navigate. You've got to have exceptional contingency plannings for litigation. You're exposed to both anti-ESG litigation, but also your stakeholders. They still expect you to sufficiently manage their assets. So it's a very complicated area, I think. So moving on to the next question. What are your thoughts on the upcoming UK SRS regulation and what is it likely to mean for the private equity and finance sector from a climate risk perspective?
Yeah, we haven't really got into the SRS regulation yet because we're more interested. I mean, when these things come up, the lawyers do a very good job of putting out lots of pieces on that. We're much more interested in the impact of that on the industry. And unless you've got something to add, Samantha, we haven't really got into that. At least I haven't. You may have done more work on this than I'm aware of.
I am working on covering it in the next issue of SII. So
Oh,
if you
good.
are interested in it, please consider subscribing to get the
Yeah.
insight first.
And Alex, Samantha's both got an undergraduate and a postgraduate degree in law. So when she gets in, she gets very geeky on things like this. So you can rely upon her analysis of it. Um, great. Is there anything else that we cover the questions that we had from the outside beforehand?
We've just got one more. I think we've touched on it before, but why are transition risks a big issue for GPs compared to LPs?
Yeah. Why? Yes, I've never really fully understood I mean, transition risk and physical risk are just so radically different, and they really shouldn't be under the same umbrella of climate risk, should they, or not? What's your
No,
answer to that question? You're better. You've done lots of work on transition risk, particularly in infrastructure, and we did the infrastructure report. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, transition risk covers a whole host of things. Impacts, for example, has split out transition risk into three main categories: litigation, regulation, and market volatility as well. But LPs, again, as I mentioned, they're really concerned with reputational damage, litigation, that kind of thing, and also low carbon transition. But GPs, it really affects their business. So you've got stranded asset risk, policy again, and regulation, but you also got the resilience of the asset itself. So when you come to cash in or exit, are you going to get a decent amount for it? Is your buyer still that you see now, are they still going to want the asset or is it going to get priced out? You got carbon pricing to consider as well. What's the market going to look like in 10 to 15 years? So it's a very core issue for GPs, I think.
Well, thank you. I think we've covered everything then we have been asked today. So thank you for those people putting questions on the day, and thank you for your attention throughout our speedy and galloping through presentation. As we've said on a number of occasions, all this is covered in a lot more detail in SII, and we hope you will be reading what we are writing about this there. In particular, what we're calling the grid, or we're calling the tracking service for GPs and LPs, is going to be developing further and further and further over the next few months. So you want to see a snapshot of how they're doing how they're managing their climate risk across the piece. That's the way to go. So thank you all very much indeed again for joining us today, and hopefully see you the next time. Bye bye,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.